For tracks were moving toward the strait before anyone could call this diplomacy. On one side of the screens, U.S. crews were tracking Iranian attack drones headed toward one of the tightest and most dangerous shipping corridors on Earth. On the other side, tankers were already stacked in the Gulf, insurers were already panicking, and every extra hour of delay was pushing more pressure into the global economy. Then the answer came back fast. The drones were shot down. American forces hit Iranian coastal radar sites at Gorak and on Qeshm Island after what Washington called an immediate threat to maritime traffic. Days earlier, U.S. strikes had also reportedly hit missile sites near Bandar Abbas and boats attempting to place mines. This was no longer a standoff over headlines. It was a war of volume, timing, and depletion, now grinding toward its 100th day. Reuters, https://www.reuters.com/world/middle-east/us-strikes-iran-radar-sites-after-radar-launch-2026-05, BBC News. https://www.bbc.com/news/articles/cvgzzn4y1n80. That is the part people miss when they hear, the U.S. struck Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. They picture one strike. One retaliation. One crisis. But Hormuz does not break that way. Hormuz breaks through accumulation. Too many drones. Too many boats. Too many mines. Too many targets that are not equal. And too little time to protect them all. This is what 100 days of war looks like when arithmetic takes over. Not cinematic dogfights. Not one decisive duel. A regional system drowning in simultaneous demands. The first demand is obvious: keep the water open. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas normally passes through that corridor. When Iran moved to close it, and when ships began backing up inside the Gulf, the battle stopped being just about territory or prestige. It became about throughput. How many commercial vessels can move? How many escorts are available? How many suspected mine lanes must be cleared? How many threats can be tracked at once before something expensive, burning, and impossible to hide appears on every trader's screen? Reuters, https://www.reuters.com/world/middle-east/what-issues-do-us-any-peace-deal-2026-06-05, Reuters. https://www.reuters.com/world/china/what's-involved-talks-and-war-2026-05-26. And that is why the 4 drones mattered. Not because 4 drones can defeat the U.S. Navy. Because 4 drones are never just 4 drones in a saturated battle space. To a shipboard weapons officer in the Combat Information Center, 4 hostile tracks are not a headline. They are 4 decisions. 4 chances to waste time. 4 chances to misclassify. 4 chances to expose radar posture, burn interceptors, or miss the follow-on layer. And in Hormuz, the follow-on layer is always the real problem. A fast attack craft is one problem. A minefield is another. A coastal anti-ship missile battery is another. A surveillance radar feeding targeting quality data into that network is another. A commercial tanker frozen in the wrong place becomes another again. This is saturation warfare in its purest form. It does not need 1,000 missiles in 1 minute. It only needs enough simultaneous pressure to force the defender into triage. What do you save first? The warship? The tanker convoy? The mine-clearing route? The surveillance blind spot? The political fiction that the ceasefire still exists? That is the pressure the United States walked into in the Strait. By early June, the conflict had already entered its 4th month. The war had begun with large U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran on February 28. A ceasefire had technically held since early April, but it was the kind of ceasefire that still had teeth, smoke, and very little trust. Iran maintained pressure on Gulf shipping. The U.S. Navy kept up maritime pressure on Iran. Negotiators talked about 60-day extensions and shipping access while operators dealt with drones, mines, missile sites, and the possibility that every pause was simply giving the next salvo time to organize itself. Reuters, https://www.reuters.com/world/China/what's-involved-talks-n-war-war-206-05-26, BBC News, https://www.bbc.com/news/articles/cvgzzn4y1 and 80. Now compress that to the tactical level. A radar site on Keshem Island is not just a radar site. In this fight, it is part of the chain that turns clutter into targeting. It helps tell Iranian operators what is entering the strait, what is slowing down, what is bunching up, what can be threatened, and when. A missile site near Bandar Abbas is not just a launcher. It is a veto point. A mine-laying boat is not just a boat. It is a cheap instrument that can force multi-million-dollar clearance operations and paralyze commercial traffic long after the original crew has disappeared. Cheap threats. Expensive answers. That is the cost exchange trap. And by day 100, the numbers are starting to matter more than the speeches. How many drones can be intercepted before crews begin thinking about inventory rather than dominance? How many suspected mine belts can be searched before escort rotations slip? How many merchant vessels remain willing to transit under threat? How many ports on the Iranian side stay under pressure before Tehran decides the only leverage it has left is to make the strait even more dangerous? This is why the recent U.S. strikes were not just punitive. They were managerial. The Americans were not simply trying to hurt Iran. They were trying to reduce the number of active problems at one time. Take down the drones, and you save reaction time. Take down the radar, and you cut surveillance quality. Hit the missile sites, and you reduce the number of veto points over the water. Hit the mine layers, and you keep a bad day from becoming a month-long commercial seizure. That is how modern maritime war really works. Not through perfect control. Through subtraction. Human anchor in this story is not a president at a podium. It is the regional battle manager staring at a screen that refuses to simplify. He knows the strait is not defended as one asset. It is defended as a hierarchy. First, keep U.S. ships alive. Second, protect the lanes needed to reopen commercial flow. Third, preserve enough freedom of action that Iran cannot convincingly threaten to close the corridor again tomorrow. That sounds clean in briefing language. In reality, it is brutal. Because every interceptor launched at a drone is an interceptor not available for something faster or lower. Every aircraft held over the Gulf is an aircraft consuming tanker support, maintenance hours, and pilot endurance. Every mine-hunting operation absorbs specialized ships and helicopters that cannot be everywhere at once. Every day the strait remains only partially usable means global pressure rises faster than military inventories can be replenished. And here is the worst fact. Even if you shoot down every drone in front of you, you have not solved the main problem. You have only prevented one layer from landing. That is the midpoint of this war. The question is no longer, can the U.S. stop the immediate attack? The answer to that, at least in these recent episodes, is yes. The deeper question is, what must be secured, what will remain under threat, and what does the survival of the shipping lane actually cost by day 100? That reframes everything. Because partial success in Hormuz can still be strategically expensive. Suppose the U.S. keeps the corridor technically open but not reliably open. Suppose traffic resumes, but at slower rates, higher insurance premiums, heavier escorts, and constant fear of mines that Reuters reported Iran says it has laid and that may be difficult to locate. That is not normality restored. That is a tax on the world economy enforced at sea. Reuters, https://www.reuters.com/world/middle-east/what-issues-do-us-Iran-. Need, resolve, any, peace, deal, 2026-06-05/. And from Tehran's perspective, that may be enough. Iran does not need to sink an American carrier to prove the strait matters. It only needs to show that reopening it is slow, expensive, and vulnerable to repetition. That is the logic of saturation from the weaker side. Do not outgun the opponent. Multiply his obligations. Make him defend shipping, bases, escorts, minesweeping routes, and regional credibility all at once. Make every success temporary. Make every reopening provisional. Now the battlefield widens. Because Hormuz is not only about ships. It is about diplomacy, sanctions, oil prices, nuclear negotiations, allied confidence, and the war's political horizon. Reuters has been clear that reopening the strait is Washington's top priority and Tehran's main leverage, while the broader peace talks remain tangled in uranium stockpiles, inspections, missile limits, sanctions relief, and the regional fronts that Iran still wants included in any settlement. Reuters, https://www.reuters.com/world/middle-east/what-issues-do-us-Iran-need-resolve-any-peace-deal-2026-06-05. So every strike near Hormuz has two audiences. The first is operational. Can this suppress the immediate threat? The second is strategic. Can this narrow Iran's bargaining power before diplomacy catches up? That second audience is where the war becomes truly dangerous. Because once military action is being used not only to defend forces but to reshape negotiating leverage, the pressure to keep striking grows. Not forever. Just enough. Just one more radar site. Just one more missile battery. Just one more boat believed to be laying mines. That is how a narrow maritime crisis becomes a long war of attrition. Not through one catastrophic mistake. Through an endless series of justified small ones. There is also no clean, victory shot available here. The United States can kill drones, degrade radars, hit launch sites, and destroy boats. It can even force some commercial movement back through the waterway. But the Strait of Hormuz is not secured the moment the shooting goes quiet. It is secured only when traffic volume, insurance confidence, escort capacity, and threat suppression all line up at the same time. That is a logistics equation, not a cinematic climax. And logistics equations are merciless. A single mine can delay ships longer than a missile strike. A single insurance spike can move markets harder than a tactical success. A single merchant captain refusing transit can expose the gap between naval control and commercial confidence. That is why day 100 feels different from day 10. In the opening phase of war, leaders talk about punishment. By day 100, they are counting. Counting missiles. Counting sorties. Counting ships still waiting in the Gulf. Counting how many threats can be intercepted before another layer appears. Counting how much coercion can be imposed before the global system starts breaking in visible ways. The decisive action in this latest episode was not simply that U.S. forces fired back. It was that they chose target categories that speak directly to saturation logic. Surveillance radars. Missile sites. Mine-laying platforms. Not symbols. Not prestige targets. The machinery that turns a narrow waterway into a pressure chamber. That is disciplined warfare. But it is also a confession. It tells you the Americans understand the real fight now is not about a single spectacular strike. It is about preventing Iran from generating too many simultaneous maritime problems for too long. And even that kind of success comes with cost. Because every day spent protecting the artery is a day spent tied to it. Every destroyer screening traffic in Hormuz is a destroyer not somewhere else. Every aircraft tasked to Gulf surveillance is an aircraft burning readiness. Every emergency escort mission teaches adversaries something about U.S. thresholds, patterns, and deep protected priorities. So yes, Washington can hit back hard. Yes, it can still dominate individual engagements. But saturation warfare was never designed to win cleanly at the tactical level. It was designed to make tactical wins strategically exhausting. That is the real lesson of 100 days. The strike on Iran in the Strait was not the end of a sequence. It was proof of what the sequence has become. A war where arithmetic now governs strategy. A war where cheap systems can force expensive vigilance. A war where reopening a shipping lane is harder than bombing the forces trying to close it. A war where survival itself is no longer the only metric. Because by this point, the question is not whether the United States can keep shooting down drones. It can. The question is how long a superpower can keep defending every moving part of a global choke point while its adversary keeps adding new pieces to the equation. That is the cold truth of Hormuz. In saturation warfare, the side under pressure does not always lose when something gets through. Sometimes it loses when too much must be protected at once, for too long, at too high a price.